Welcome back to another episode of your Digi Hustle News. As always, I'm Wade Teamer. In this episode, we are going to break down all ISO 20022 compliant blockchains, why these tokens matter, the timeline of events for this transition, where these standards originate, and even how this current conflict is related to it all. Everything you need to know is going to be put on the table in this episode. So strap in, smash that like button, and let's get to business. What is ISO 20022? In simple terms, it is a global standard for transmitting data or information between two parties. These messages are what banks use to determine the who, what, when, where, and why of a transaction. It's a lot similar to what the blockchains on this list have already mastered. That is what makes this transition and these coins so important to keep tabs on. This is the real-time process of the old financial system integrating with the new one. Now, the article that this list originates is from Investor Palace, written on December 22nd of last year. But this piece was heavily inspired by this image from July of 2020. It illustrates the 5 projects that are already associated with this ISO transition. This is the web in which we will crawl today. Before we get into it though, let me show you just how far-reaching these standards truly are. Let's start with Swift. They've been in the news a whole lot recently, but what the media won't tell you is that Swift is leading this transition. This is what the majority of the world's financial institutions currently use, but by November of this year, the industry migration to ISO 20022 begins. Again, all financial institutions using Swift are participating in this transition. This includes 11,000 banks across 200 different countries. Going further into these standards, the International Organization of Standards has a full website that you can get all this information from. Here, we can learn a number of lovely little details, like how many different industries adhere to these standards. Quality management, so your corporate and retail settings, warehouses and factories, environmental standards that align with the global sustainable development goals, health and safety, energy management, so your solar, wind, and geothermal, food safety, and IT security standards. Now, this IT security standard will be revisited later in this episode because there is currently only one blockchain in this space that already has this compliance. Now, next I want to show you this article on the ISO website titled Streamlining the Financial Industry. This was written in 2014. In it, they talk with Vice President of SGX, a multi-asset exchange out of Singapore. He states that mandating the use of ISO 20022 will enable greater automation and straight-through processing, or STPs. A consistent messaging standard will help reduce data processing risk for high-value transactions. Errors can result in significant losses. His words reflect the real issue to be fixed by these ISO standards, piecing together the fragmentation in traditional financial markets. Now, to further illustrate just how deep this goes, the next paragraph paints a picture of who are already active back in 2014. The Eurozone, which is using it for its migration to the single euro payments area. Then we have Japan, the DTCC in the United States, G3 in Singapore, and Swift even used it to process investment fund messages. I will place links to these 2 documents as the pinned comment. This is so you can always reference this information. To really hammer home though, just how far up the ladder these standards reach, I want to call back to our Agenda 2022 episode and the G20 roadmap. The G20 is the global organization that moves the global economic agenda. This roadmap actually calls for standard formats to come into play as soon as June of 2022, with implementation plans and guides to follow by December. We also see options for CBDC access and interlinking by July, and multi-CBDC arrangements also in December. This is the plan coming down from the G20. You can find more information on who the active players are by going to their site, ISO20022.org. Here is where you want to focus on the RMG member list. Right away, you can see the relationship with RippleNet. You can also see the nations involved. And what I found to be the most interesting is the fact that Russia is nowhere to be found, yet it is also a G20 member. With that, we can start getting into this web of coins that are already active in this transition, now that we have a full understanding of the scope of things. The case for Ripple does not need to be disputed at this point, as they were the first blockchain to ever become compliant. So, if this transition is in fact happening by November of this year, then accumulating XRP right now could very well change your life by Christmas. Whenever a new article about the SEC case pops up, I chuckle because I know it has no effect on XRP's place in this transition. This case is simply going to give way to a rule change that will also fall in line with the agenda of these new standards. So, in my opinion, XRP is a go for sure. Now, for XLM, it's a bit tricky because it's not explicitly stated like XRP. Stellar is more so connected by its industry relationships, most notably IBM. IBM and Stellar have been close for a while now. We know about the world wire that Stellar supported with IBM, but it's IBM's Hyperledger fabric that will be the bridge to tie traditional finance to blockchain. Hyperledger Fabric is an open source project from the Linux Foundation. It is described as a benchmark modular framework and de facto standard for enterprise blockchain platforms. To understand the scale of Hyperledger, we have to look at its vendor and member organizations. First name I want you to notice is Accenture. It will appear several more times. Then we have Consensus, Hitachi, Huawei, IBM of course, Oracle Data Systems, and the Moscow Exchange. Then there's Quant, SAP, and Wipro. These are the vendors. Our members include Accenture, the DTCC in the United States, JP Morgan, and a number of retail brands, tech companies, FedEx, and Filecoin. Then we have Hedera Hashgraph, which we will dive into that connection later in this episode, but this list gets even more exclusive. Next, we have Input Output Hong Kong, which is, I assume, how Cardano gets brought up in this conversation often. Going forward, we see Quant again, which a lot of people have told me have associated with being ISO compliant already. If they are in this company, then that is very likely. That's very likely, guys. But we have Ripple, R3. R3 gives us XDC and Corda, which is also important. Then we have Sberbank. This bank is Russian. All right. This bank also back in 2017 conducted a money transfer pilot using IBM's Hyperledger fabric. This same bank, as of March 2nd, 2022, has removed itself from the European market, which is largely using SWIFT, as per the instruction of Russia's central bank. Funnily enough, SWIFT is also on this list along with Walmart, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and Cambridge University. Now, Cambridge is also a place you want to keep your eye on in this transition. Published on March 1st, a new digital asset program with 16 institutional collaborators. Of course, we won't go through the whole list, but I have highlighted the most important names for you. Again, Accenture, the IMF, Bank for International Settlements, Goldman Sachs, among others. Now, the agenda to this program has three areas of focus. The first area is centered around environmental social governance. The second, distributed financial market infrastructures. And the third is focused on emergent monetary systems such as crypto assets, stablecoins, CBDCs, consumer tokens, and payment coins. All of these relationships are what strengthen the case for Stellar Lumens when it comes to ISO compliancy. Stellar is a quiet chain, but it's slowly preparing for billions of transactions to flow through its network. So we have covered the major two. This leaves XDC, IOTA, and Algorand. We'll start with Algorand. What I have on Algorand starts with a document from 2020 called The Future of Payments by the Digital Monetary Institute. This research paper was the result of a collaboration between Algorand, Citigroup, MasterCard, Novi, and Swift. The DMI is under the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, another global body. The Algorand blockchain itself is definitely capable of handling a CBDC, much like Ripple and Stellar. Algorand already has a full stack of resources for CBDC development. But I will admit, the case for Algorand took the longest for me to crack. However, when I took a second look at their ecosystem, I started to see a couple repeat names, like Tangem, a wallets provider, and SAP for applications. Both are members of the Hyperledger Foundation. In addition to this, there already exists a working platform built on Algorand called 6 Clovers. This platform was designed to allow organizations to perform real-time cross-border payments using stablecoins. So, as far as Algorand goes, the relationships are there, but what shines the brightest is the technology potential. When it comes to IOTA, our diagram connects IOTA to something called Data Confidence Fabric. This brings us to Project Algorand. Back in May of 2021, Dell, Intel, and IOTA introduced the DCF. The fabric essentially tracks data from point A to point B, giving a confidence rating for each stage of the data trial. Project Algorand is designed using IOTA's Tangle distributed ledger. Now, this application can also be applied to cross-border payments as a way for banks to verify where funds actually get to. So, again, with IOTA, we have an instance where a blockchain has technologies already in place that correspond with the global agenda. Now, XDC, also known as XDC Network, is growing more and more popular every day. For example, just a couple weeks ago, they signed a deal with the Major League Soccer team, DC United. That's Washington, DC United. This is the first for any major U.S. professional sports team. Now, DC will use XDC to create virtual fan experiences with the fan token and NFTs. This will not only bring notoriety to XDC, but it will ultimately give them recognition in U.S. markets. That's a small piece to a puzzle that gets much larger when you learn that XDC is also a JP Morgan coin. You see, XDC is a fork of Quorum, which is JP Morgan's first blockchain, now currently known as Onyx. This means that JP Morgan, who is definitely one of our largest financial institutions, had a hand in developing XDC. I don't think they would have developed something that wouldn't be compliant. What I think we have here is a situation where JP Morgan is using Onyx privately and XDC will be their public chain. In addition to this, back in 2019, they joined R3's blockchain consortium and they were referenced by the World Trade Organization in a blockchain and DLT report. On XDC's website, zenfin.org, it does state that XDC's private network allows enterprises to connect legacy systems to blockchain using ISO compliant messaging. As financial institutions come online and see this, XDC is going to get snatched up quickly. I want you all to notice another pattern here. All of these chains we've mentioned so far are utility coins. This means that as utility increases, so will the value. What we can expect to happen here is the majority of the world's transactions will start to flow through these 5 assets. Well, 6 if you count Circle. Circle just so happens to support Algorand and Stellar. Surely they are just waiting for Ripple to finish off the SEC, and then they'll be added here too. And then we have Hedera Hashgraph. Hedera, we know, is a member of the Hyperledger organization. We know that Hedera's governing council is full of entities from all sectors that will have to adhere to these standards. In addition to IBM's presence, we know one of Hedera's partners, Shinhan Bank, has been conducting cross-border payments using stablecoins on Hedera. Then there's MTech and Project New Dawn, a joint effort between MTech, HBAR, and the Federal Reserve. By the way, the Boston arm of the Federal Reserve, also a Hyperledger member. On top of this, Hedera has enhanced smart contracts and the Hedera Starter Launchpad all coming in the next few months. Pretty much, Hedera checks all the boxes. Its governing council has to adhere to these standards. Hedera is being used for many payment applications already, and with the IP now being open source, literally anyone can use it. Hedera has to become compliant in order to continue competing on the global marketplace. So now we have crypto.com. I have made it my mission to get CRO in this ISO conversation, and I'm going to tell you why. Back in July of 2020, crypto.com became the first blockchain in the world to achieve ISO IEC 27701 certification status. By November of 2021, they added 2 more in the form of ISO 27001 and the SOC2 compliance. That same SOC2 compliance is the one that Ripple has, and the same ISO standard that is listed on the website under IT and security standards. Now, what is CRO also known for besides Matt Damon? Their vast payments ecosystem, where the crypto.com debit card is the gateway to crypto payments. So they already have compliancy on the IT side. When the time comes, why wouldn't they be able to get the same thing for payments? Calling back to a bit earlier in the episode in our interview with the Vice President of Singapore's Asset Exchange, that illustrates that Singapore was a large player in the beginning of all of this. Wouldn't you know it? Crypto.com is based in Singapore. But hey, I guess we'll find out this November. Until then, if you found value in this episode, check out this video on CRO's deal with one of America's largest asset managers, or our Agenda 2022 episode that helped us prepare for this transition. And always remember, if the money is digital, so is the hustle. I'll see y'all in the next one.